Chapter 19. The Kiss. Richard closed his eyes and listened. I hear the fan blowing through the wood. I hear some of the pieces tapping against each other as they swing. I think I can hear the rumble of a truck on the old highway. Or maybe it's a jet. There, I just heard a bird chirp out in the orchard. Richard hesitated. What else? Softly asked the luthier. I can hear a faint creak or moan coming from the walls. The sides of a tin can buckled loudly in the back of the shop. Probably from the temperature changing, Richard thought. And I just heard that tin can in the back as the air expanded inside it, Richard added. He smiled, since it was loud when compared with the other things he had mentioned. After a long pause, the luthier asked, And do you hear the spider wrapping a small bug behind us? Richard began to reply, Of course not, but then thought better of it. He cleared his mind and tried listening more carefully, concentrating on any sound that might be coming from the wall behind him. Richard knew the luthier was getting at something, and he found himself doing whatever he was asked. Richard listened more carefully and waited. After a minute, he thought he heard it, and soon realized that there really was a small chewing and rapping sound coming from the floor behind him. Yes, I do, he exclaimed, just off to my right. Very good, commented the luthier. In a somber tone, the luthier continued. It is said that a Shaolin priest could tell you whether that spider was missing a leg while wrapping his web. That's impossible, Richard responded while opening his eyes. The luthier remained in his chair with his eyes closed. He stopped his slow, shallow breathing, and a small, peaceful smile began forming behind his beard. His third leg back on his right, the luthier calmly assured him. Richard quickly got up and went to where the sound was coming from. It was dark in the corner, so he pulled out the small flashlight hanging on the end of his rental car keychain. He knelt down and searched until he found a small house spider hanging in its web. It was holding a bug and busily winding it up for a snack later on. It was missing its third leg back on its right. Richard knelt in disbelief. It's impossible. He then glanced toward the artifacts in the entry, where the Aztec priest's costume was now standing almost in the center of the room. Richard's mind began racing back, and he thought about the samurai swords, wondering if the luthier had really made them after all. He staggered to his feet and confronted the luthier. Who are you? He whispered. Richard's voice became intense. What are you? The luthier rose briskly from his chair. I am a master luthier. That means that you can forge 700-year-old samurai swords and fool the best authorities in the world? That you can hear better than the famed Shaolin priest? That you can read my mind and make instruments that can take over people's souls? Richard thought, this can't be happening. This cannot be real. The luthier had an evil smile in response to Richard's accusations, and as he walked toward the entry, Richard could hear chanting from within the foundation of the stairs. The feathered costume came alive when the luthier touched it, and his eyes became wild. Richard stepped back as he imagined his own blood running down the steps between the serpents' heads. And are you now going to pull my heart from my chest with your bare hands, and like the ancient Aztec priest, hold it in front of my face so I can see it before I die? The luthier withdrew an obsidian knife from the costume and turned around. That is next. Michelle pulled the bra off of Richard and threw it into a trash can along the way. Once they were out of sight of the school, she stopped and unwrapped the duct tape. His wrists were red and swollen, and his arms bruised and aching from his fall down the stairs. They continued in silence, and Richard hung his head. He didn't dare look at Michelle, and he couldn't think of anything to say. When they came to the road leading to Richard's house, Michelle turned the other way, leaving Richard walking up the sidewalk alone. The moment he realized that she wasn't beside him, she tugged at his arm and gently began pulling him toward the park. Richard still hung his head, but this time because he was ashamed. It had been so long and so much had happened that he had all but forgotten about the two trees. All of the heartache and events of that past year overwhelmed Richard, and he hesitated when she beckoned him to follow her through the gate and into the park. He knew that he had let her down and failed her as a friend, and his life felt more worthless than ever. As he walked across the grass, he thought of his first letter, then his last, and how he had stopped writing her altogether. He thought of Michelle's letters, how she was meeting new people and having fun, while he sat in his room alone, staring out the window. He also realized how he must have looked, stumbling and falling at her feet in front of the school. It could only have been worse if she had seen him on the floor when everyone laughed. What would she think when she found out just how much of an outcast he really was? Then he remembered the lipstick. How I must look to her. Once he realized that he was standing between the two trees, he began to cry. Michelle opened her purse and took out a handkerchief so she could wipe the lipstick off Richard's face. When he didn't respond, she lifted up Richard's chin until he looked her in the eyes. "You look awful," she said while shaking her head. And Michelle always means more than she says, Richard thought. Michelle gave Richard a smile. "Close your eyes and promise you won't open them until I am completely finished and I tell you to open them." Richard hesitated. Words like that had just changed his life forever. But this is Michelle, he thought. He still hoped that she was his friend. "I promise," he barely choked out. Michelle went to work. She pulled out a cotton cloth and a bottle of makeup remover, then started wiping the lipstick from Richard's face. While she worked, Richard realized that Michelle had a purse. He also realized that her hair had grown back. It was almost to her shoulders, and it had the small curls around the bottom again. He almost broke his promise because he was so anxious to look at her again. Michelle finished by blowing the fumes away from Richard's face. While the cleaner evaporated, it felt cool and tingly. The smell finally went away, and Richard waited for her to speak so he could open his eyes. Instead of hearing words, something soft touched his lips. He wondered what it could be after it remained there for a moment. Then he felt her soft, warm breath against his cheek, and his lips twisted and began slowly moving back and forth. Richard almost burst out loud. "Michelle's 16 and she's kissing me." Michelle didn't stop. She rotated her head the other way without ever losing contact, then moved slowly and softly for the next few minutes. It was their first kiss, and they were standing in the shade of the two trees with nothing touching but their lips. With a soft little smack, Michelle stepped back. "Okay," she announced. Richard opened his eyes. Michelle brought her thumb and forefinger up to her chin and pretended to scrutinize him. After winking at Richard, she announced, "You look much better now." And he was.